This presentation aims to compare the authorisation process to the evaluation process for the International Baccalaureate Diploma program. To distinguish the two programs initially, the purpose of the authorisation process is to allow schools to qualify to deliver the International Baccalaureate Diploma program. The process involves being firstly recognised as a candidate school and then working to develop the school and present evidence of adaptation in alignment with the IBO expectations and practices. On the other hand, the purpose of the evaluation process is to ensure that schools are meeting IB program standards and practices over time. This process occurs every 5 years following authorisation and requires schools to present continuing evidence of their practices in alignment with IBO expectations. Both the authorisation and evaluation process begin with the submission of a particular document, though the document is different for each process. For the process of authorisation, the submission of an application for authorisation is required, which, once accepted, leads to the scheduling of the verification visit. The evaluation process is similar, but involves the submission of the self-study questionnaire, which reflects on the school's progress with the IB program over a 5-year timeline. Once these documents have been accepted, the purpose of the authorisation verification visit is to substantiate the content of the application for authorisation. In contrast, the purpose of the evaluation verification visit is to substantiate the content of the self-study. In both processes, we can see the relationship between the submission of an essential document and the follow-up process of verification. One of the key differences between the authorisation process and the evaluation process is the fact that the authorisation process takes place only once in order to determine the school's status as an IB World School. Schools are expected at this time to have implemented some standards and practices, but not all, and these are articulated through the Guide to Authorisation. The evaluation process, on the other hand, is a recurring process and recurs every 5 years. The aim of this process is to ensure that schools are maintaining their standards and practices as an IB World School. Once the process has been undertaken, schools are expected to provide evidence that all standards and practices are being effectively implemented. This needs to be substantiated on an ongoing basis. The authorisation and evaluation process do share some key features, and one of those is the requirement of the action plan. The action plan is initially developed during the authorisation process and expected to be updated regularly, or at least once a year, from that point onwards. The action plan is in alignment with the program standards and practices and demonstrates how schools are working towards meeting these standards and practices over time. The action plan demonstrates a 5-year action period, so is adjusted after each evaluation process. Another common factor in the process of both authorisation and evaluation is the verification visit. Both visits are expected to take 2 to 3 days to conduct, and both visits are conducted by IB representatives. It's the responsibility of the school to arrange for space, catering and accommodation suggestions for the representatives where appropriate, and this is the case for both processes. In the case of both verification visits, they are conducted in alignment with the IB standards and practices. Both seek to determine the school's engagement with the IB philosophy, the program requirements, and the progress of the school in regards to its action plan. It's important to note that neither verification visit aims to appraise or assess teachers or school leaders. It is more about the school and its ability to meet the standards and practices of the program. Prior to a verification visit, the school is charged with creating a verification agenda, which they communicate to the IB for approval. Schools recommend the personnel that are best suited to be involved in the site verification visit, and the IB confirms the agenda based on school recommendations. Both the verification visits for the authorisation and evaluation process end with the production of a feedback report. This evaluative report seeks to give feedback to the schools as to how well they were able to produce evidence of their implementation of standards and practices of the IB. The language of the report does slightly differ, as the authorisation report outlines commendations, recommendations and matters to be addressed, while the evaluation report outlines areas in which the school is excelling, demonstrating, developing or emerging. The result of each process also differs. Following the conclusion of the authorisation process, a school can be granted one of three statuses. Authorisation means that the school is from there on recognised as an IB World School. Continuation of candidacy suggests that the school remains a candidate school until it can collect and demonstrate further evidence of its implementation of standards and practices. The refusal of authorisation means that the school has not been recognised and are no longer eligible to submit authorisation approval. The evaluation process is similar. Following this conclusion, a school can be given evaluative ratings for standards and practices of either satisfactory development, the requirement of additional development, or requiring significant attention. The process at the end of authorisation and evaluation also differs. Successful approval of the authorisation process will see a school recognised as an IB World School until the evaluation process takes place 5 years later. Refusal of authorisation sees the school unable to achieve recognition, and the school is unable to apply again for at least 2 years, after which they undergo the candidacy process again. For the evaluation process, if the evaluation is satisfactory, the IB will be evaluated again in 5 years. If there are matters to be addressed in the evaluation report, schools are expected to submit evidence to satisfy these matters. If matters are not addressed to the satisfaction of the IB, the program may be withdrawn, depending on the circumstance and context. Hopefully this presentation has given some insight into the similarities and differences between the authorisation and evaluation processes for the International Baccalaureate Diploma program. Should you require further information, the listed documents below detail where more information can be found about standards and practices and the authorisation and evaluation processes.